My name is Pink. I'm 60 years old, a homemaker, a wife, a mother. Or at least I used to think I was. These days, I'm not so sure. My husband Richard was 67 when he passed, and everything changed after that. We'd been married over 30 years, and like most long marriages, ours was full of ups, downs, and quiet, ordinary moments that somehow became everything. Richard was a driven man. About 20 years ago, he left his job at a large corporation and started his own IT company. He didn't do it for money or fame. He did it because he believed in building something that would outlast him. And in a way, he did. The company took off, especially after they expanded into data science and analytics. 10 years ago, it started growing at a pace I couldn't even keep up with. I didn't understand the technical talk, big data, cloud systems, predictive algorithms, but I was proud of him. He became a respected figure in his field. Eventually, Richard stepped down from the role of president, passing the torch to new leadership while staying on as chairman. He talked about retiring fully for years, but something always pulled him back in. He liked to stay busy, even when he got tired. We had one son, Sean. When Richard retired as president, we both hoped Sean might step up to carry on the family legacy. But Sean had other ideas. "I don't want people thinking I'm just living off my dad," he told us after college. "I want to make it on my own." It stung a little, sure, but I was proud of him for wanting independence. Richard felt the same, even though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Still, we supported him. After Sean left home, the visits became rare. At first, it was just the occasional holiday, then only at Christmas. Eventually, just a phone call, if that. I told myself it was normal, that boys grow distant, that maybe he was busy. But I missed him. A lot. Then one day, well before the usual Christmas call, Sean phoned out of the blue. "I've got something to tell you," he said. "I'm coming home soon." That alone made me light up. But then he added, "I'm getting married. I want to introduce you to Mandy." Just like that, my quiet heart flipped with joy. He was coming home with someone he loved. Maybe this was the bridge I'd been hoping for. I couldn't stop talking about it. Every time I saw Richard, I'd remind him, "Sean's coming soon." He would just smile and nod, but I could tell he was excited too. 3 weeks flew by, and finally the day came. When Sean walked through that door, I nearly cried. He looked grown, confident. Behind him stood Mandy, his fiancée. She looked like someone out of a commercial. Youthful, bright-eyed, delicate features. She had a nervous air about her, glancing around the house with cautious curiosity. "Come on in," I said warmly. "Dad's waiting in the living room." As they sat across from us, I noticed Mandy's eyes scanning everything. It made me feel exposed somehow. "Is there something you're wondering about?" I asked, trying to break the awkwardness. "Oh, no, sorry," she stammered. "It's just different than I imagined." Sean chuckled nervously. "She means the house is more normal than she thought." Richard and I exchanged a look and laughed. I knew what they were expecting. Some kind of luxury estate, maybe. Truth is, even though Richard ran a successful company, we never lived extravagantly. We liked simplicity. We didn't wear designer labels or drive flashy cars. Our house was modest and warm. Mandy apologized again, and I told her there was nothing to worry about. "You'll see," I said. "Richard's not as scary as you think." As the visit went on, she relaxed a bit. She was 27, more mature than I first assumed. I had worried Sean wouldn't settle down, but watching them together, I felt hopeful. 3 months later, they got married. The ceremony was beautiful, and it came with an unexpected gift. Sean started calling again, once a month, like clockwork. "Hi, Mom, everything okay? How's Dad?" It wasn't deep conversation, but it was something. I knew it was Mandy who encouraged him. She probably found out he'd been neglecting us. Whatever the reason, I was grateful. Then came their first Christmas as a married couple. They visited us, and I pulled out all the stops. I made every traditional dish I could think of. Ham, roast vegetables, creamy potatoes, fruit tarts. I wanted it to feel like home. But something felt off. Mandy sat quietly at the table, barely touching her food. Her eyes shifted from plate to plate, like she was trying to find something that made sense. "Is there something you can't eat?" I asked gently. She smiled and shook her head. No, thank you." But she barely ate anything. That night, as they were putting on their coats, Sean pulled me aside. "Mom, maybe next time try something a little more modern." "What do you mean?" "Your Christmas dishes are kind of outdated." I blinked. "Outdated?" He lowered his voice. "They're made for preservation, right? These days, people expect more fresh, rich flavors. Mandy was probably a little disappointed. I forced a smile. I see. I'll keep that in mind. But it stung. I had tried so hard. And instead of thanks, I got told I was out of touch. After that, the monthly calls became bi-monthly, then quarterly. I wondered if Mandy had been offended by my food, if I'd somehow ruined things again. Richard noticed my mood. "She's not upset about food," he said. "Sean just isn't used to making the effort." Maybe he was right, but the hurt lingered. Then, half a year later, Richard fell ill. He had always been strong, always the one who held us up. Watching him grow weaker day by day shattered me. "I guess it's time for me to finally retire," he said from the hospital bed. He tried to laugh, but I knew it wasn't how he wanted to end things. I called Sean, of course. "Dad collapsed," I told him. His reply was indifferent. "Oh, I'll come see him sometime." He never did. As Richard's condition declined, so did the phone calls. Not even a text at Christmas. The silence was louder than any rejection I'd ever known. And then 3 years after his diagnosis, Richard passed away. I called Sean again. "Dad's gone," I said. He didn't cry. He didn't pause. "Yeah, well, he had a good run, right?" He came to the funeral, stood through the formalities, then left without saying much. I remember watching them, Sean and Mandy, get into their car and drive away, laughing at something like it was just another day. That laugh shattered something in me. After the funeral, I was left with everything. The house, the memories, the grief. It was overwhelming. But slowly, I began to heal. I cleaned the house, organized papers, handled the legal matters. It was exhausting, but it gave me purpose. Until one morning, just as I was folding laundry, the doorbell rang. I checked the monitor. Sean and Mandy. No warning, no holiday, just standing there waiting. Confused, I opened the door. "Mom, we're going to look in Dad's study," Sean said flatly. They brushed past me without waiting for permission, heading straight for Richard's old workroom. I stood frozen in the entryway for a moment before following them. They were rifling through drawers, opening cabinets, flipping through files. "What are you doing?" I asked. Sean looked up, unbothered. "It's time to talk inheritance." Sean barely glanced up from the drawer he was rummaging through. Mandy stood beside him, arms crossed, scanning the room like she already owned it. "Inheritance," I repeated, my voice sharp but steady. Sean didn't even flinch. "Dad said everything would come to me eventually. I just want to get a head start. You're alone now. You don't need all this." I blinked. "Excuse me?" He stood up straight and gestured around the room. "This house, the savings, his stocks. It makes sense for me to take over. You'll have enough from the insurance payout, right?" My chest tightened. I wanted to laugh, cry, and scream all at once. "Richard and I built this life together," I said slowly. "Do you think I was just standing around doing laundry while he made millions?" Mandy chimed in. "Don't get emotional. We're just trying to be logical here. You're retired. You're going to get lonely. Maybe you should downsize and, move somewhere quieter." I stared at her. "Is that your way of suggesting I leave my home?" She gave a small shrug, as if that idea was the most rational thing in the world. Sean pulled out a folder from the desk drawer and flipped through it. His eyes lit up. "Here it is, the savings book." He walked toward me and held it up. "This shows the $30,000 account Dad kept separate, right?" "Yes," I said, "for emergencies." "Great, I'll just take it now. Mandy and I need a down payment for a bigger place." I stepped back, stunned. "You're joking." "No," Mandy said, smiling. "That's what Dad would have wanted. Richard would have done a lot of things, but he never would have agreed to this. He believed in helping family, but not in handing over wealth without thought or effort." Still, I froze. Something in me couldn't say no. Not right away. Maybe it was the grief. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe I just didn't want to believe my only child could be this cold. I said nothing. Sean took it as a yes. "Thanks, Mom. We'll call soon." And they left. Just like that. No hug, no goodbye, no, "How are you holding up, Mom?" Just gone. And with them, $30,000 of my husband's hard-earned money. Weeks passed. No call. No thank you. No sign of remorse. I sat at the kitchen table every morning, staring at the spot Richard used to sit. I imagined what he'd say. "They'll come around. They're young." But even in my memories, he sounded unsure. Then one day the phone rang. I picked it up, already hoping. It was Sean. "Mom, we've talked things over. Mandy and I think it's best if we cut ties." I held the phone to my ear in silence. "What?" "You're judging us. You're always cold now. It's toxic. Mandy says it's not good for our future kids." "I gave you $30,000, I whispered. "Which Dad would have given us anyway," he said. "It's not like you're broke." "You haven't asked how I'm doing once since the funeral." He sighed. "Look, we just don't want a relationship filled with guilt trips and drama. We need space." Then he hung up. I stood there alone, the silence wrapping around me like a shroud. That was the moment I realized something deep, bitter, and liberating. They didn't love me. They loved what they thought I could give them. And once they assumed I had nothing left, they cut me loose. Months turned into years. I never heard from them again. But slowly, quietly, I built something stronger than grief. Richard hadn't left me with just enough. He left me with everything. The house, yes, but also 6 properties we had invested in over the years, each one bringing in stable monthly income, enough to live not just comfortably, but independently. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't move. I stayed in the same modest house, drove the same car, wore the same clothes. I disappeared into simplicity. But I paid attention, and I planned. One summer afternoon, nearly 2 years after Richard's funeral, I was out shopping for groceries. My hands were full, bags dangling from my arms, sun beating down. That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Oh my God, Mom!" I turned. There they were, Sean and Mandy. Mandy was wearing oversized sunglasses, holding a fancy tote bag. Sean looked thinner than I remembered and a little worn out. Their expressions were mixed with surprise, amusement, and pity. "Wow," Mandy said. "Didn't expect to see you here." I gave a polite nod. "I live nearby." "You look different," she said, eyes scanning my outfit. It was an old blouse, loose jeans, a sun hat. I looked like any other retired woman on a budget. "You doing okay?" Sean asked, almost mocking. "I'm fine," I said simply. Sean glanced at Mandy. "We were just talking about you the other day." "Oh?" "Yeah, wondering how you were managing." Mandy leaned in. "It must be hard, with no family to help." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "It's not so bad," I said. "I've got a small garden. Keeps me busy." Mandy gave a fake pout. "Still in that tiny house?" I nodded. "Still there." "Well," she said, "you look like you're surviving." Then she paused. "But if you ever need anything, Sean and I are always here." I tilted my head. "You mean if I suddenly win the lottery?" They laughed a little too hard. "No, seriously," Sean said. "We didn't mean to be harsh back then. We were just overwhelmed." I nodded again. "Of course." "Well, we should go," Mandy said, already turning away. "Brunch reservation." "Nice seeing you," Sean added. They left, and I stood there in the sun, groceries in hand, heart pounding. Not with sadness this time, but with something else entirely. Power. They still thought I was broke, and that suited me just fine. After that awkward run-in at the grocery store, I walked home slowly, replaying the entire conversation in my head. Their smirks, their fake concern, that odd tone of pity, and the worst part, how convinced they were that I was barely scraping by. I should have been angry. But I wasn't. I was entertained. They had no idea. They thought they'd cut me off, left me broken and alone. But really, they'd freed me from the burden of pretending we were still a family. And now, they were living under the illusion that I was living hand-to-mouth in an old, creaky house, probably rationing canned soup and knitting by candlelight. Let them think that. The truth was far more interesting. In the years after Richard's passing, I took charge of everything we had built. I met with accountants, I sat with lawyers, I educated myself on property taxes, maintenance costs, insurance policies. I was in every meeting. I reviewed every tenant contract. I ran the numbers myself, twice. Richard and I had built a quiet empire. 6 apartment units, all fully paid off, all rented to good, steady tenants. Every month, checks rolled in, more than enough for groceries, upkeep, travel, and savings. And then there was the stock portfolio. Diverse, conservative, built on decades of patience. It wasn't flashy, but it was stable. I had income, I had assets, I had independence. But I didn't flaunt it. I wore simple clothes, drove a 10-year-old car, paid in cash at the market. And most importantly, I kept my mouth shut. Because power, I've learned, is quiet. After that encounter with Sean and Mandy, I went home and pulled out a notebook from the drawer beside my bed. It was the notebook I used when I needed to think things through. And that day, I began to write a list. People who were there when I needed them. My neighbor, Angela, who brought soup the week Richard passed and never once asked for anything in return. The building manager, Mateo, who took over tenant coordination when I was too overwhelmed with grief. The receptionist at Richard's old company, who still called every Christmas just to say she missed his laugh. And Richard's former assistant, Ellie, who showed up at the funeral with tissues in her hand and tears already falling. These were the people who mattered. These were the people who showed up. Sean and Mandy, they were nowhere near that list. One morning, I visited the 6th apartment, the smallest one, right above a bakery that made the entire stairwell smell like cinnamon. I had just finished collecting the monthly rent when I stopped to chat with the tenant, a young woman named Lila. She was a single mom, barely 24, with a baby girl and a stack of library books always sitting by her door. She worked part-time, studied online at night, and never once paid her rent late. "How's school?" I asked, leaning on the railing. She smiled tiredly. "Getting there. It's a lot, but I'll finish. I have to." I admired her grit. "You know," I said slowly, "if you ever needed help with childcare while studying, I could—" "No," she interrupted gently. "Thank you, but I won't take advantage." Her pride reminded me of Richard. I smiled. "Then let me say this," I added. "You're doing a good job. I see it." Her eyes watered. She looked away, embarrassed. "But I meant it." Later that week, I called my lawyer. "I want to rewrite my will," I said. We scheduled the meeting for the following Tuesday. When the day came, I sat in her office with my list in hand. "I want to divide everything between 6 people," I told her. "None of them are blood relatives, but all of them showed me more love and loyalty than my own son." She didn't flinch. "Do you want to include a letter of explanation?" "Yes," I said, "but not one full of anger, just clarity." And so we drafted the will. 85% of the estate would be split evenly between the 6 people on my list. My house, the rental units, the investment accounts. 10% would go into a scholarship fund in Richard's name, something he had always wanted to do. And the remaining 5%? Well, that would go to Sean, just enough to remind him what he lost. Not out of spite, out of truth. Weeks passed. The holidays came and went. I spent Christmas with Angela and her grandchildren. We baked cookies, watched old movies, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. No card came from Sean. No call. No apology. But I didn't need one. I had let go. Then, one spring afternoon, I received a phone call from an unknown number. It was a lawyer. "Mrs. Cyrus," he began, "I represent your son, Sean. I believe he's recently become aware of your assets." I chuckled. I figured that would happen eventually. "He's hoping to arrange a meeting to discuss estate planning. He assumed he was your primary heir." He assumed wrong. The lawyer was quiet for a moment. "Would you like me to inform him?" "No," I said calmly. "I'll do it myself." I didn't rush to meet with Sean. Instead, I invited him and Mandy to the place where Richard and I used to celebrate anniversaries, a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, and so was the silence when I arrived before them. I booked a private corner table. When they walked in, Sean looked stiff. Mandy wore a pastel dress, trying to appear polished and gentle. Neither of them knew what was coming. "Thanks for meeting," Sean said, sliding into the seat across from me. I nodded, pouring myself a glass of water. "Of course. It's been a while." They exchanged glances, and Mandy leaned forward first. "So, we heard you've done well for yourself." I raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound like I won a game show." Sean chuckled awkwardly. "We just thought, after everything, you might want to reconsider the estate. You know, now that we're reconnecting." "Are we reconnecting?" I asked, my tone calm. Mandy blinked. "Well, isn't that what this is?" "No," I said softly, "and this is goodbye." They both froze. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single envelope. Inside was a copy of my will, minus the full names and legal details. "I figured it would be more polite to tell you in person," I said. "You'll find you're in the will, Sean. 5%. 5? He choked. I was generous. Mandy's face went pale. But you're his mother." I looked her in the eye. "Yes, and I was a good one. I gave, I taught, I forgave. And when I needed comfort, you gave me silence." Sean's voice rose. "You're punishing us for not calling enough?" "No," I said, folding my napkin neatly. "I'm rewarding the people who showed love without a price tag." He stared at me, stunned. Mandy recovered first. "Well, we'll contest it." "You can try," I said, standing, "but it's airtight. Ask your lawyer." I didn't wait for more words. I walked to the elevator, heart steady. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt done and free. After that final dinner, the phone stayed silent. No more fake check-ins. No more manipulation. Just space. Real peaceful space. And into that space, I poured everything I had. I began volunteering once a week at the library, helped organize a neighborhood food pantry, donated to women's shelters. I wrote letters to each of the people on my will list, not explaining the money, just explaining why they mattered. To Angela, I wrote, "Your soup healed more than my stomach." To Mateo, I wrote, "Your reliability helped me sleep through nights I thought would swallow me whole." To Ellie, I wrote, "You showed up when my own son did not." And to Lila, I wrote, "You reminded me of what strength looks like in a younger woman. I hope my gift helps you build something lasting." These letters became my truest legacy. Not the money, not the properties, but the recognition of the good. Years passed. I grew slower, but never bitter. And one day, as I was tending my garden, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Lila. but not alone. She had her daughter, now maybe 6 or 7, holding her hand. "Hi, Miss Pink," the little girl said shyly. "Hi, sweetheart." Lila smiled. "I brought you something." It was a small framed photo. Her daughter at school, holding a certificate for top marks. "She wanted to show you." I took it in my hands, my throat tightening. "You're doing such a good job," I whispered. Lila looked down. "So are you." We sat on the porch, drank lemonade, and watched the sun fade behind the trees. And in that moment, I thought about everything I used to believe legacy meant. Power, family, bloodlines. But none of that stayed. What did? Kindness. Consistency. Truth. Years from now when I'm gone, people may forget my name. They may not know who Pink was, but they'll feel what I left behind. In full bellies. In safe homes. In degrees earned. In gardens grown. Not one penny of my husband's hard-earned wealth will go to waste, because I made sure it would live on in hands that knew how to hold it, with love, not greed. And as for Sean, he'll remember me every time he explains to his friends why his mother left him 5%. He'll say it was unfair, that I was old-fashioned, cold, harsh, but deep down he'll know. He'll remember the $30,000, the silence, the smirks, and maybe, just maybe, that memory will plant a seed. One that says, kindness matters, loyalty counts, and most of all, don't wait until it's too late to show it, because you never know when someone's silence is not weakness. It's the start of something stronger.